the reflection of a man.
My name is Laura. This is one of those stories you tell at parties with friends, and everyone keeps quiet, thinking that you're exaggerating or that you're just being stupid. But I swear this happened, and every time I remember it, it makes my skin crawl. In those days, I worked in a pharmacy near downtown Mexico City. It's not that I hated my job, but the routine could become suffocating. Day after day, taking the subway, putting up with the crowds, the rushing, the pushing and shoving. Don't get me wrong, I love Mexico City, chaos and all. The colors, the smells, the sounds, but the subway. There's something special about that place. It was a Tuesday, I think. Nothing special happened at my work. The same old customers, the same old complaints about medicines that were out of stock, and of course, the perpetual battle with inventory and expirations. At the end of my shift, I felt exhausted. I walked to the nearest subway station and waited for the train. While in the carriage, standing holding one of the bars, I began to lose myself in my thoughts. That kind of trance you feel after a long day at work. By inertia, I looked at my reflection in the window. The Mexico City subway has that peculiarity. During the night, with the interior lights on, the windows become mirrors. Then, I saw it. In the reflection, a man was standing right behind me. An older gentleman, perhaps in his 50s, balding at its most advanced point, wearing a plaid shirt that looked like it had seen better days. His features were those of someone tired, with wrinkles marked by years and experiences I would never know. What puzzled me was that I didn't recognize him. He didn't look like anyone from the office, or a neighbor, or even someone I had seen before on the subway. And believe me, after so long taking the same train, at the same time, one begins to identify the same faces. I turned my head to look behind, trying to find the gentleman and, perhaps, identify him. But there was no one there. I turned around completely, thinking maybe he had moved, but no, there was no sign of him. Confused, I looked again at the reflection in the window, and there he was, still standing, looking down at the ground, as if lost in thought. For a moment I thought he was hallucinating, a product of fatigue. Or maybe I had misinterpreted the reflection. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but something inside me told me it was not. A few days later, the event repeated itself. I was in the same car at the same time, and in the reflection, the same man. He never looked up, never showed any intention of approaching, he just stood there. But every time I turned to confirm his presence, he disappeared. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, the universe or something bigger was playing a twisted game with me. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. But the truth is, even though I tried to ignore it, the mystery of the man in the reflection was beginning to consume my thoughts. It wasn't just the figure appearing and disappearing that disturbed me, but the feeling that something bigger was at play. Something I couldn't understand or see clearly. But I couldn't help wondering, what did it mean? Why him, and why me? A few days later, the experience on the subway intensified. I was coming home from work as usual. The car was half full, which was unusual for that hour. I found an empty seat and settled in, hoping to get to my stop. As usual, my eyes strayed to the reflection in the window. There he was, again, but this time, something was different. He wasn't looking down at the ground, as he usually did. He was looking directly at me. His eyes reflected a deep sadness, as if he had experienced unimaginable pain. Feeling a shiver run down my spine, I froze. That look penetrated me to the depths of my being. The atmosphere in the car changed. Everything felt heavier, denser. Although there were people chatting and children laughing, everything seemed to have gone silent. I could only hear my heart beating and the sound of the subway moving along the tracks. Without a second thought, I stood up and headed for the door. I couldn't stand to stand there another minute. I didn't care that it wasn't my stop, I simply had to get out. Once outside, I stood on the platform, trying to calm down. My breathing was labored and my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I took several minutes to collect myself before catching another train. Days passed, and for some reason, I no longer saw the man in the reflection. I began to feel a relief I hadn't felt in weeks. I began to think that it had all been a figment of my imagination, of my tiredness. But a week later, I received a very special phone call. It was my sister, crying on the other end of the line. She informed me that our father had passed away suddenly. My world fell apart. I couldn't believe it. My father had been fine, at least as far as I knew. During the funeral, as I looked at old photos of him, one in particular caught my eye. It was a picture of my father. He was smiling, with that infectious smile he always had, and he was wearing a plaid shirt. A sense of dread came over me. It was him. It was the same shirt, the same smile, the same look. The man in the reflection. It was my father. The truth is, I don't understand anything that happened. I mean, if someone had told me that I would see my father in the subway reflection before he died, I would have told them they were crazy, but that's exactly what happened. And the truth is that I had a really hard time coming to terms with it. I don't know, some things just can't be explained, you know? Maybe my old man was somehow trying to warn me or prepare me for his departure. As weird as it sounds, I'd like to think that he wanted to be close to me in those days before he left because I hadn't seen him in years. Now every time I take the subway, I can't help but look at the reflection in the windows. Part of me hopes to see him again, another part is afraid that I will. It's a very strange feeling, like I'm waiting for a sign or something. I don't know, I just wanted to share this story because I feel I needed to get it out. Sometimes I think that if I don't tell it, people wouldn't believe me, or they would think I'm crazy. But this happened to me, and it's something I can never forget.
She wouldn't stop looking at me.
Hi, Herr. I really like what you do. I hope this story of mine makes it into a video. I remember that day vividly. It had been a horrible day at the office. You know, one of those days when you're left with more work than you can handle and you're stuck at your desk until the night swallows the day. By the time I left the office, the clock already read 11:30 p.m. Yes, super late. So, dragging my fatigue, I arrived at the subway station. At that hour, you know, there are almost no people. Well, except for those lost souls who seem to have the world on them and are barely standing. The station had that echo that reminds you how lonely it is, and the cold air crept into every nook and cranny of the place. There weren't many seating options, but I found one of those that, while incredibly uncomfortable, after a day like the one I'd had, seemed more comfortable than my own bed. I don't remember at what point I fell asleep. Suddenly I woke up. I was in the same carriage where I had jetted off, but something was wrong. The lights were flickering and gave the carriage an ominous tone. I got up from my seat and looked out the window. The subway was stopped at a station that, I swear, I had never seen in my life. Everything was old and dark, and the lights, though flickering, revealed something that chilled my blood. The carriage was full of people, but they were not normal passengers. Their skins were a dull gray, and they all had their eyes pinned upward, their mouths wide open as if they were seeing something that terrified them. I turned to look for a way out, but there was no way out. I remember my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I closed my eyes, trying to wake up, but when I opened them, everything was still the same. And who would have guessed that just when I thought everything was screwed up, things were going to get even worse? Because yes, that's exactly what happened. For a moment, I wanted to scream. But what the fuck was that going to accomplish? Besides, those entities, or whatever they were, they didn't seem to bother with me. They were all there, looking up at the sky as if they were contemplating a famous painting above the wagon, or something. What did hit me hard was the realization that my cell phone had run out of battery. You know, you think you can do anything with your phone, even call the cops in your sleep. But no, the thing was dead. I decided to get up the courage and approach one of them. There was a guy about my age with a backpack on his back, and his eyes were also glued to the ceiling. I nudged him, but nothing. He didn't even flinch. I was about to try to shake him off when a noise behind me made me jump, which almost knocked my heart out of my chest. I had forgotten that the subway has two sides, and at the other end of the car, there was a dull, repetitive noise that was getting louder and louder. I turned slowly, hoping it wasn't something more than what I had already seen, but well, the universe was joking that night. There she was, a lady, fat, in a flowered skirt that looked like something out of the 70s and a blouse that even in the dim flickering of the lights glowed with colors that hurt my eyes. But what really fucked me up was seeing her banging her head against the carriage door, once, twice, 3 times. Without stopping, like she was trying to crack a nut with her forehead or something. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. I just thought, no shit, no shit, no shit. But my body didn't react. And just as I was about to let out a scream, the lady stopped. She stood still, motionless, as if someone had pressed the pause button. I was a little relieved, but it wasn't over, because slowly, very slowly, she began to turn her head towards me. That's when I really felt the terror. His eyes. Those eyes. They had no pupils. They were white, like 2 milk marbles. But the worst came next. His mouth, which until that moment seemed normal, began to twist into a smile, showing more gums than teeth. A smile so wide and sinister that it looked like his face was going to split in half. The carriage, which up to that moment was silent, was filled with a low but clear laughter coming from that lady. It was not a merry or mocking laugh. It was cold, like those laughs you hear in horror movies that you know foreshadow something bad. Suddenly, I felt a tug on my arm. I spun around, and there was the guy with the backpack, looking at me with terror-filled eyes. He yelled something at me, but I couldn't hear him over the lady's laughter. I tried to read her lips, and what they said was, "Run!" Without thinking, I started running towards the other exit of the carriage. I could hear the lady's footsteps behind me, and they felt closer and closer. With every step I took, I felt as if the floor of the carriage became sticky, as if something was trying to stop me. Just when I felt I couldn't take it anymore, that the lady would catch me, a jolt woke me up. I opened my eyes, and there I was, in the same carriage, with a brighter light than in the dream. I looked around bewildered, and to my great surprise, I realized that the same people from the dream were there in the carriage, but obviously they were normal people. There was nothing frightening on their faces, and among all of them I recognized one person in particular. Her. The lady in the flowered skirt was looking at me from the other end of the wagon. Her eyes were no longer white, they were normal, but she was looking at me. That got on my nerves and I couldn't stand to be there. You don't know the bad vibe that enveloped me then. As soon as the subway stopped at the next station, I got off immediately. I didn't even dare to look at her. I usually like to see the logical side of things, and I guess my brain registered everything it saw before I fell asleep. And that's why I dreamt it. But you want it not. It's still creepy, especially the part about the lady. The more I think about it, the more I think I met a witch. Thanks for reading me.
The melody of the tunnel.
Anonymous, please, Herr. This is a very short story, but I hope you like it. Since I was a child, I was always attracted to music, but not that of academies and orchestras, but the day-to-day, the one you live and feel. Playing in the subway was something I didn't plan, but life takes many turns. There are those who say that it ran in the family. My grandfather played guitar at parties, and my dad, although he won't admit it, hums all the time. And there I was, sitting in my corner near the station platform, waiting for the coins to rain down in my open case. Life in the subway is a different story. It's like a mini city underneath the real thing, with its own rules and people. From office workers to street vendors, everyone crosses paths in those tunnels. I saw many of them every day. Some would smile at me, others would pass me by, but I would keep playing because, well, if I didn't, I couldn't eat. What many don't understand is that in the subway you don't just play to make a living, you also play to forget, to drive away the demons of stress and fatigue. But one day, those demons became real. There were things that got on my nerves. For example, those children running barefoot and disappearing into the crowd, or the old ladies muttering prayers and casting suspicious glances. But what really got me thinking was a certain melody. It all started on a normal day. I was tuning my guitar when suddenly, amidst the bustle and hurried footsteps, a distant melody sounded. I thought it was my ideas or that some other musician had decided to stand nearby. But no, it was coming from the tunnel. It was like a musical lament, a sadness creeping from the darkest. I can't describe it. The first few days I tried to ignore it, but then strange things started to happen. Whenever that melody came on, something bad happened. Once, a guy passed out right in front of me. Another day, a couple of guys started fighting for no reason. It seemed like that melody brought a bad vibe. I kept thinking, what could it be? I tried to ask, but no one seemed to notice, or they just didn't want to accept it. Until one day, a candy vendor told me, "Don't dig too much, man. There are things in the subway that better remain a mystery." Anyway, a few days later I was talking to the ticket agent, a man I had been friends with for a long time, and I told him that I had heard that melody, telling him everything I had seen. He told me that years ago, when the subway was just starting to work, there was a musician who came down every day to play his violin. He was no ordinary musician, the guy was a virtuoso. People stopped just to listen to him. But one day, out of nowhere, he went into the tunnel, and they never saw him again. They looked for him everywhere, but nothing, as if the earth had swallowed him up. He only left his violin, which was lying on the platform. Since then, some say they have seen him in the empty cars, playing his violin. Others say they only hear the melody, but never see anything. And the older ones, like the ticket agent, say that this melody is not from this plane, that it is the lament of the musician who is still looking for the way out. I really didn't know whether to believe the Don, but at least he had an answer. I, for my part, stopped listening to that sound of the tunnel, but I still have the memory.